My name is Tori Lupinek, and you are listening to The Unclassical Musician, the podcast empowering the new generation of classical musicians to take risks and live a fulfilling life. Each week, we dive in headfirst into a topic on the minds of young professional musicians and come out the other side with a new perspective on life as an artist. Hello, 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 and welcome to part 2 of 3 on our series featuring Musicians Who podcast. This week, I am chatting with Jason Heath, who is the host of the podcast Contrabass Conversations. And when I say the host of the podcast Contrabass Conversations, I mean like Jason started this podcast back in 2007, like when podcasting was like kind of becoming a thing, but like not really. 2007, I was in high school, and I think the only podcast I had ever even attempted to listen to was probably a Harry Potter podcast. So if that puts this into perspective for you. But I was so excited to get to chat with Jason for 45 minutes because when I think about the type of artist who listens to this podcast, I think of someone who has every potential to be a Jason Heath or a Heidi K. Begay or a Karen Cubides, who is going to be on next week. And I hope that y'all feel as inspired by hearing the stories of these 3 awesome podcasters, because their pathways have been very unique. And if anything, this just goes to show us that the predetermination, landmarks of success that we have come to expect from a quote unquote career in classical music are really no longer the norm. And in a post-pandemic world, things are just going to keep changing. So I hope that y'all are garnering as much inspiration from these conversations as I am, because it was super cool to get to talk to these people. But anyway, if you don't know who Jason Heath is, obviously he's a bass player. He's from the Chicago area as well. And I actually know of Jason from when I was at DePaul, because he was team teaching my music entrepreneurship class or intro to music business class with Melissa Snoza, who is another flute player. She's the flutist of Fifth House Ensemble, which is a variable chamber music group in the Chicago area. But literally, Jason has done it all, like from freelancing, gigging all over Chicago, teaching privately, teaching bass lessons at the university level. He's even taught high school orchestra. He's a podcaster. His blog is very successful. Now he's a salesperson for Eastman Music. And it's just the epitome of a portfolio career. And he's so great at what he does. So I hope you enjoy meeting and chatting with Jason Heath.
Hey.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Wow. It's so honestly, I don't care. I don't care what this sounds like, but it is such an honor to have you on this show. I can't believe your show is legendary in terms of classical music and podcasting. And I can't believe that you're here.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Small world, huh? That you were in some like entrepreneurship class or something that you probably had to take at DePaul, back, whenever that was. So I remember that. I remember talking with Melissa Snoza about that and coming in. And yeah, that's hilarious. I don't even know when that was. That was probably like 2015, maybe, or somewhere around there.
Yeah. I graduated in 2015, so it was probably a couple years before then, because I was like, I don't think that the entrepreneurship class was a requirement. I think I had space in my schedule to take it, but I remember you coming into the class and being like, he does so much. Like, this sounds like so much work. I just give me my salaried orchestra job, because that sounds way easier than doing this.
Well, it's funny. I've always sort of hated doing classes like that, because I think it's a real story. And I've talked to folks that have hung out their own shingle and done projects, and it's like, where is there a place for that in school? And I'm not sure what the answer is to that, because it's like there's a beauty in just getting really good at your thing, and I don't think everybody. And it's like when the person is ready if you're not ready for the message, it might just be kind of a waste of time. I was talking with Rob Knopper, who's in the Met, and he runs Audition Hacker, and we were talking about that, and he's always got an interesting take on that kind of thing, and I'm still not sure that the answer to that what music students need is yet another class teaching them a bunch of skills, because it's like a really complicated thing. Like, what does entrepreneurship even mean? Like, you're doing something entrepreneurial, but also teaching flute is an entrepreneurial in its own way too, and creating a performance career. So it means so many different things. I don't know. I'm sort of glad that's not my job to try to come up with something like that. So, but
I mean, yeah, it's so multifaceted. There's so many things you can do, especially nowadays. It's like any intro, really an entrepreneurship class is like intro to entrepreneurship, or intro to music business, because it would be impossible, especially at DePaul, because the classes are only 10 weeks long. It would be impossible to actually get someone to feel confident in their abilities to go out and make their own freelancing career when they're 20 years old.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know, I've sort of, the older I've gotten, I've sort of just, getting really good at something, getting to an Olympian or somewhat, that kind of level at something, that dedication will transfer over to other things. And I have yet to see people who really dive into music, that if they broaden out or they try something else, they usually end up being pretty successful at that one thing. So it seems like it's good prep. I'm not sure that, and what do you take away when you add this something else in, right? Do you I don't know. It's a tricky one, but congratulations on getting the podcast going. I was looking at, it looks like a pandemic project, right? Did you get started late last year? Okay.
Yes, pretty much. Yeah, the impetus was actually Heidi K. Begay with her podcast. I had reached out to her on Instagram, you're one of my favorite classical music podcasts, and she was like, you if you want to, you can have your own podcast. And I was like, really? And so that was September, and then the first episode aired in late October, and now here we are. I don't even know what number episode this is. This might be 30, baby.
Well, bravo! Are you having a good time with it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm having an incredible time. I can't believe, it's a lot of work, producing the show and doing all the editing and the social media and stuff. It's a lot of work, but the people that I have gotten to talk to and meet in the past 8 months or however long it's been, never, if I did not have a podcast during the pandemic, I probably never would have gotten to talk to or meet all of these awesome people.
Yeah, if you think about it a certain way, it's almost like you're getting free lessons, especially if you're talking with people in a certain, and I don't know, for me, podcasting, there's nothing hard about it, at least in my experience, but it's just a lot of little steps that add up to something big. It's like, there's no skill in there that's that hard, but edit. And if you edit, there's no such thing, in my book at least, as a little editing. You either don't edit or you go in and you got to go through the whole thing. So, but it's a fun thing for me, because it gets an opportunity to sit down and turn turn off the phone and chat with someone, it gets that on the calendar, and so it's a good self-improvement project. And luckily, I've been doing it long enough. I have help for some of those more frustrating tasks, but even still with what I do, it's like I've got like a checklist of what I need to do for every episode, like just me, and it's still 11 things, after talking to somebody. So that's as lean as I've gotten it. Maybe I can get it leaner in the future, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me also it's because I teach a lot of junior high and high school kids. So podcasting has also been like adult social time. Which has been good, especially with dealing with having to teach kids online during the pandemic. This has been nice.
I'll bet. Yeah. Well, my heart goes out to you. I have a whopping 2 students intentionally because I don't want to teach not at all because then I feel like a fraud. But for me, students are like this is a bad analogy, but they're like a fungus. Like I have a couple, and then before I know, I have like 30 again. And I have so many other things in my life I do. I just like teaching a lot of bass isn't one of them. But like, I'm so sick of teaching those kids on Zoom, and they're so sick of working on, and one of them, this poor girl, she is just like pandemic fatigue like you wouldn't believe. And so it's I can only imagine like folks that's like a lot of what they do. It's got to get old.
Yes. Yeah. And like finally, like this summer, band, like the band directors are like opening up the band halls and be like, you can come and teach lessons if you want. We're not going to use the practice rooms, but you can come and use the smaller band rooms to teach. And those kids and those parents who I have only known online because they started during the pandemic, they're like, oh my God, yes. Please, yeah. Like anything, just like get them out of the house, get them with an actual person, Oh
yeah. Well, events are finally coming back. It seems in general, and I've got the first bass camp in the U.S. I think that's happening in person. I'm doing it's in L.A. and that's in 2 weeks, and it'll be so fun to just get out. I've sort of been a lot more pandemic proof than a lot of people because I do things more in the industry, but I'm just bored, and so I just want to get. And so right after that, I think I go to the middle of nowhere, Indiana, for the second bass camp that's opening up. So it looks like things are, looking good. I know things are probably a little more open in Texas than they have been in California, but even here in California, like San Francisco is starting to feel a lot closer to normal, and there's music, there's outdoor music all the time here, and it's things are pretty close to that. The symphony is actually doing in-person concerts finally.
Oh, nice.
So slowly but surely.
Good. Yeah. A lot of people in Texas is like, I mean, like, say what you want about the way Texas leans one way or another, but a lot of people, I think, are recognizing how fortunate they were in some ways that the state opened up as early as it did, because it allowed things to go back to normal sooner, obviously, with the consequences that be. But I think compared to some of my friends in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, it's like, we didn't have it so bad here in Texas, honestly.
Yeah, I was living vicariously through my Texas friends in like January, February when everything shut back down again here. I've actually been obsessed with Australia the last year because they've been good at eliminating the virus everywhere except Victoria, where Melbourne is. But I mean, nobody's vaccinated, so it's like this. You're on the edge of a disaster movie. Like Melbourne is now shut down indefinitely, but they had been doing concerts in person, inside, all that. But the rest of Australia, I think even Sydney, at least recently, has been really effective. But like Perth, that whole area. They haven't had a case in, I don't think, months. So whenever I want to just sort of see, I feel like I'm watching an alternate universe, seeing like full symphony concerts, my friends, Australian friends over there playing. And so anyway, that's kept me positive. Now it feels better here in California, but especially like 6 months ago, it got dark because everything opened up and then it shut down again. And that was like worse here because you could see like, oh, we can at least kind of have some performances. And then they shut down all dining and everything. And it was like a long, dark couple of months here.
Oh gosh, like there is light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, just kidding. We're going to take that away now.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. But I have to ask, when did you move to San Francisco?
2016, I moved. My wife moved in 2015 because she is a radiologist now, but she was doing a residency here. And I was a little worried about the cost of this place, which is a rational fear. And I did the math, and I realized unless I figured out something real quick in California, I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to eat, and or pay rent. So I stayed back and did all the stuff I did in Chicago, but I was just so miserable. I thought I'll just move to California and do anything. And so 2016 I moved out here. And so it's been fun. I feel like a Californian now. I complain about the rain, which Jason from Chicago would have been so ashamed of. I bought a puffer coat and I wear it in 60-degree weather, which I also you get real soft real quick here. At least that's been my experience. So
my gosh.
Yeah, I like it though. It's fun. It's crazy. It's a crazy town, but it's my crazy town now. So
that's good. That's awesome. Yeah, because I remember, and I went back and read through some of your bio and stuff on your website. It's you really had a lot going on in the Chicago area. Was it hard to quit everything that you had going on there and move halfway across the country?
Yeah, it was. But
hello, music friends. Heidi Begay here from the Flute 360 podcast. As you may know, Flute 360 has been launching weekly episodes to the community since 2018. Because of the success that the podcast has brought my career, I wanted to offer the same success to you, the unclassical musician. As an unclassical musician, you want to impact your community through your music and instruction. You juggle multiple hats, being a performing artist, teacher, adjudicator, clinician, and more. Wouldn't it be nice to have a piece of digital real estate where your ideal clients can flock to you? That's exactly what a podcast can do for your music business. In a recent survey, 59% of participants mentioned that they spend more time listening to podcasts compared to spending time on social media. That's huge. Because of this, I am passionate to help fellow musicians launch their podcasts in my class titled The Podcasting Musician. Join me for the July 2021 class and learn from myself and my audio engineer husband all the ins and outs of podcasting. Register today through my website at HeidiKBegay.com. And for a limited time, I am offering Tori's listeners a 10% discount off of the remote class. Use your code TORI10 to receive your discount today. See you soon.
Yeah, it was. But after a couple of months of living apart from my wife, I've never been depressed, but I thought, I think I understand what depression is. As I was sitting there watching Netflix with my two cats, and I got really into running because I just had nothing to do. And then it got cold in Chicago, and it would be dark when I got home from work. So yeah, it was tough, but I don't know. I was teaching at DePaul part-time, and then I had a really good high school orchestra director job. And I was gigging and doing all that sort of thing, but I just realized it's I'm living apart from my wife to teach high school, which if I told anybody that, I know it's a good program and all these jobs like that aren't created equal. Illinois has some good jobs. Texas has some great jobs like that. But I just realized this is silly. And so it was hard, but I intentionally didn't focus on playing when I moved out here because I wasn't sure if we'd move again right after residency. And I was in Chicago 20-some years, and you just build up a lot of stuff. And then you start, what the Bay Area did not need is another freelance bass player. They're all full, thank you very much. So now I've been lucky to do some playing, but I just thought I don't want to build up or focus on all that again. And now I'm really glad I didn't because all my poor freelancer friends in the Bay Area have had a pretty rough year because, if they've taught, they've continued that, but especially folks that were relying on people to sub out to play, it's who knows when that work's coming back. So in hindsight, I've said this too much, but I've been preparing for a pandemic inadvertently for a long time, but yeah, I thought when I moved out here, if I can immediately think of 5 people, if I get a call and I could think of 5 people to recommend, I just don't take that opportunity. Which is kind of a weird thing to do, but it's if I get called for the Santa Rosa Symphony, I know so many people that would be great for that. So I just, it was hard, but it was now I know it was the right decision. And even back then, I thought it was the right decision. But it was a little scary because I moved out and I watched the finances go down, and I thought I just decided to pretend my podcast was my job, and it kind of became my job or associated opportunities, but it certainly wasn't in 2016. And so I had like kind of a stressful year just trying to like hope that things would click, and then they did click, but it was it took a solid year before I realized, oh, I can do this and related activities instead of all the traditional employment I've been doing.
So would you say, like, I don't know, I guess if you had to like break down all of the stuff that you do nowadays, like what percentage of your work is to do with Contrabass conversations?
Well, I have a what you call because of my podcast career, like the podcast kind of pays for itself. I have some people that work on it with me, and I have sponsors and such, and they pay for that. And then in non-pandemic times, once a year, I would go take a trip for the podcast, and that would just be I would just use that sponsorship money for that. So I went to Australia in 2019. I went to New York City in 2018, and kind of like base journalism, I guess. But then I've developed all sorts of consulting opportunities, and now I'm the strings product manager for Eastman Music Company down in LA, and so that's my day job. So it's a salaried position, and I go around and do events and new product development, artist relations, trade shows. I go to a city, and they'll connect me with some clinics and some schools, so I get to still do some conducting and that sort of stuff. So if you told Jason in 2015, 2016, that's what I'd end up doing, I would have thought, awesome. But it was like a long, slow road of just like meeting people and one thing leading to another. So I do that, and then that's the Eastman job is most of what I do. But I go around and do a lot of base community events too, and then your random. I have a couple online courses and a couple other things like that. So everything I do. The only reason I have the Eastman job is because of my podcast, and the same is true for pretty much everything I've done in the last decade.
Which is incredible. Like that's so cool to hear, but like you really do have to like treat it like it's your job, right?
Well, I did treat it. I decided to pretend it was my job. I would wake up at 8 a.m. and I'd work till 5 p.m. and I was kind of stressed out because we didn't make enough money to pay our bills. So I had saved some money, but every month there would be less in the bank account. And this town is known for being incredibly expensive, which it is. And so it was just kind of like, I was sort of hoping, and I tried a bunch of things that didn't work, and it took some time. I don't know why things ended up working, but in mid 2017 or early 2017, some things started to click, and I started to get hired for some other consulting jobs. And I all of a sudden realized, I got to this point where I had like 5 or 6 irons in the fire that were generating revenue. And then the playing started to pick up. I never tried to push that, but San Francisco Symphony started to call me. And so I occasionally sub with them, which is a good time. And yeah, things just started to pick up, but it was all just pretending. I think it was pretending that it was a job, just focusing on that, and I knew something would work out, and I didn't know what else to do because I didn't want to teach high school anymore, and the jobs, well, there were no jobs available here, and those that did come up paid maybe half of what I was making in Illinois, maybe a little more than half, but I didn't want to do the same job for half the pay.
Right.
Well, could I walk dogs? But I'm like scared of big dogs, so I knew that wouldn't work. And then I thought maybe I'll drive Uber, but I didn't even have the right car for Uber. We had this Honda Element, and so I was like, what's a 40-year-old guy who's done nothing but music, and built up all this stuff what do you do? And so the podcast, it might seem like a silly thing, but I had done it and not done it for a long time, and I'd gone into my statistics, and I realized like, oh wow, a lot of people listen to these episodes actually. And so like, what if and I'd never really focused on it back when I started it. I kind of had 2 podcasts. I had like the podcasts I did like 2007 to 2010, 2011, and then I pod faded essentially because I was teaching high school orchestra full time, and I just had no time. And then I relaunched in 2015 and focused on getting better at it, and I hope I've gotten better at it. And so I sort of think of that. I had this weird, dusty old podcast with bad audio and talking about my MySpace page, and then I have like the more contemporary stuff.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, it was 2007. I mean, how good was the audio going to be? You know?
Yeah, I had this horrible. I had this Ace. I guess it's not the laptop's fault, but I had this Acer laptop. This like hilarious mammoth PC thing with all these fans, and I had this audio recording program. I don't remember what it was, but it was just terrible. And it would record me and the guest on one track, and our audio would drift, and I would get ahead of them. So they would be talking, and I would all of a sudden start laughing like a maniac, and then they would tell a joke, and there'd be dead silence. And so,
oh my God,
all sorts of problems.
That sounds terrible. I'm sorry. I mean, we're recording on Zoom right now, and this does record on one track, but at least it like keeps everything together the whole way through. It makes it super easy to edit it for me because I'm the only person doing this.
Well, and the visual thing I think is so nice. I've connected with a few folks that have started podcasts recently, and there are so many options for recording podcasts. And I think you can get a bit better audio using Zencastr or one of these. Although I think those programs do video too. But actually, when I put the Zoom file into my audio editor, the fidelity is just as good as anything. And I like being able to see the person. I've always thought it's really weird to not have that visual connection.
Yeah, especially nowadays. I mean, nowadays after the pandemic, you know, it's like going back to talking on the phone, or like if we were trying to have this conversation like without the visual cues. I don't know, like this feels more like having an actual conversation, like as close to real life as you can possibly get, which I think makes everything feel a lot more authentic and just a better experience for us and then the listeners also.
Right. I know. Yeah, I 100% agree. You probably haven't done anything in person yet, have you, since you've been doing this all during the pandemic?
You mean like interviews in person?
Yeah.
No, I have not done any interviews in person.
That's I had gotten into this rhythm, which has been stopped since the pandemic, but of only doing them in person, which for my own podcast, which is kind of fun. I was tying it into travel, and I don't know. I'll certainly do more in person in the future, but there are advantages and disadvantages. My favorite way is to like either go somewhere and be on location and see some concerts that someone's playing and then talk to them at their place or at a restaurant or bar or something like that. Or being in San Francisco, a lot of people just come through San Francisco. They're playing with the orchestra and they're on tour. And I'm in a fun part of town, so I take them out for lunch and bring them back to my place and we talk. I'd been doing a lot of interviews at trade shows, which can be okay, but like everybody's so scattered at trade shows that I think the content is not... I got some great interviews, but a lot of the time I was like, it felt not as in depth as maybe, one-on-one in a more quiet place. So we'll see. But the in-person is a lot of fun. In some ways, the way I like to podcast, I'm assuming we've started at this point, which is the way I like to do it, is just have a real conversation. And the thing that's a little awkward when you're doing it in person is there does have to be that moment where you're like, all right, here's your mic, here's my mic, let's get some levels, here we press record. And so it's a little harder to just sort of seamlessly go. But I've gotten better at that in person, but that sort of formal awkwardness that can happen, particularly with someone that hasn't done interviews before, that's one of the nice things about just kind of like hopping on and just starting to talk.
Yeah, for sure. Because I always feel like people are more authentic, like before you hit the record button. And then you hit the record button and then like something changes, like all of a sudden they're like in professional mode, which is fine. But sometimes you can catch some like really nice, authentic / funny things when you just start recording from the very beginning and they're like, are we recording? I'm like, I can edit things out, whatever you want. I can edit them out. But like, this show is just all about being more real and relatable and authentic in the industry. So I think that's part of like what makes the show unique.
Well, that's what I noticed listening to some of what you've done, which I like, because I did not learn that lesson until way in, because I would have a conversation that I'd say, okay, hold on. Now we're going to start. And then I would like do this formal intro and it would just kill the energy. And I learned over time. I would also, I had this, I've learned a lot of what not to do. And that was one of the big lessons. So just do an intro for someone separately and then just like have a real conversation.
Yes. So in your intro, I will have already told the people about what Contrabass Conversations is a little bit and like a little bit about your background and stuff. But is there anything that you want to tell the listeners about your show, like what the show's about, etc.?
Well, the dirty secret is it's not really about the bass at all. Particularly, it's just a nice way to have a niche. And I am not much of a gearhead. I'm not, it's sort of ironic because I've had this blog for a long time. I have this podcast, so I get a lot of people writing in with these really technical questions. The answer is almost always, I don't know. I'm like a fairly pedestrian bass player, so I used to talk more about bass specific stuff, and it's just not that interesting to me. But if it comes up, it comes up. But I would say that and I talked to a lot of non-bass players. They're mostly bass players, but it's just kind of a nice way to have a niche. And so that's been, it's talking about, I don't know what it's about. It's about whatever. That's maybe not good advice for someone who's starting to do a show. You might want to have more of a focus, but maybe not, So for me, it's, talking to bass players about their lives, I guess. I need to think about, it's been a few years since I thought about taglines or what the show, or my elevator pitch or anything like that. So I think that, maybe I should tighten that up.
No, it's fine. Like, do you know how many episodes you've done?
Yeah, we're over 800 at this point. So I don't, somewhere over 800. And I didn't number everything, so it's probably beyond that. But I've done some greatest hits if I've been on the road, and I've done some compilation episodes over the years. So I probably had 800 guests, something like that.
I mean, like, I would probably lose track of what the show is actually about after 800 interviews too, / 2 million downloads, something crazy like that. That's insane.
Yeah, I think we're actually closing in on 3, but that's another one of the lessons I've learned is like only occasionally check in on the numbers, because I'm somebody who gets I don't get upset. I'm probably not the worst at that, but I like to check in every couple of months and just make sure nothing weird's happening or see was anything particularly popular. And podcasting, my experience and talking with a lot of other people who kind of have micro niche podcasts, it's like a long, slow burn. Like it is not a people that get into your podcast tend to be super fans, but like it's a great way for developing deep connections, but it is not, and it's a little bit of a vague thing to measure in terms of metrics. So it's, if you're expecting thousands of downloads right off the bat with something like a podcast, I think people get disappointed. But it's a fun. I personally enjoy it a lot just because of that self-improvement aspect of it. Getting to sit down with somebody and have a long conversation and do some research beforehand. I think it just helps keep me active, keep me learning new things, and keep me stretching my boundaries and trying to reach out to people that I probably wouldn't talk with if I didn't have a podcast. For sure.
Yeah, I remember like the first couple episodes, I was just happy that the trailer was downloaded over 50 times. That was just like, yes, over 50 people are interested in what I have to say. And now it's like, I honestly can't believe that this many people have listened to what I have to say and and are interested in the other people that I know and respect and like want to talk to and learn from. I'm constantly just like humbled, which is like a nice feeling to have, especially like since I teach so much. There's not a whole lot of gigging in the Houston area, like during the pandemic, obviously. Before the pandemic, it's like that transition from being a student to being an adult and a working professional who has to make money doing the thing that they went to college for. It's like it's humbling.
Well, sure. I can only imagine, especially as a flute player, because I like something I play like bass. Well, we got 8 bass players in an orchestra, 6 to 8 or something like that, and then we have all the other genres that basses typically play, and I think they're also. I haven't researched this, but I'm guessing there are probably less bassists than there are flute players. And if we polled the world, and so just the And so you got, two, maybe three positions if we're talking the classical world, for any given orchestra. It's just incredible when I really think about that, how hard that can be. But, going back to let's say that number of 50 people that downloaded your trailer, let's say that was it for the audience. That's still 2 full classrooms of people. And if you think about that, or one ridiculously full room, so if you went to a conference and you got into some medium-sized room and there were 50 flute players or 50 people interested in that in there, you'd probably be thrilled. And so, metrics are funny because you can, and if you look at an Instagram post or likes or that, but if you just put those numbers in the right context, you can realize, and I think probably just about anybody would rather have 20 people that were deeply engaged in something than 100 people that were vaguely paying attention.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I like that way of thinking about it. I had never honestly thought about it that way before. But yeah, it's if you have 100 people in a room captivated for 45 minutes, that's a lot. You can really touch a lot of people that way. It's a lot of responsibility also, though.
Yeah, it can be. For me, I just try to make sure I say exactly what's on my mind, and I'm 100% honest in what I'm thinking. And then I never this is probably a good rule for life. I never have to keep track of what I've said or not said. I just make sure I'm say whatever I think and try to be kind and I have very little rhyme or reason in terms of who I connect with or when I connect with them or what about. It's a combination of, I've done the show long enough that I get a lot of recommendations from people that listen. I have a wonderful guy named Trevor Jones, who's kind of my business partner on the podcast. He passes along a lot of recommendations, does some research, and then just random, people pop on my radar. So it's, there's not much rhyme or reason. I'm really impressed by people that do have a little more intentionality. Heidi is a great example with her podcast, just how she has these grouped thematically together, and I think it's really incredible. I have done that from time to time, and I think it's a great way to do it. I just haven't done that recently.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of forethought to plan things out like that. And, when you've got 100 plates spinning, sometimes it can be hard to actually think about creating an actual theme for 4 whole episodes. Whereas it's oh yeah, I've been meaning to have this person on my show, and it's just a standalone. And that's way easier, double easy if it's a friend and I don't have to draft questions for them beforehand, and we can just record an honest conversation, which I'm thinking that might be in the cards for July, because I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing for the show in July yet, but that sounds good to me. Some summer programming.
Some lesson I learned either from Dr. Phil or Oprah or both or something. Some interview is get ahead, stay ahead, and that's been my rule, or that's been my MO with the podcast the last few years, and especially when I travel. I've actually been much less. I'm always a bit ahead, but I've been much less ahead the last couple of months, just because I've been doing all these over Zoom, and but typically I would go somewhere and I would collect 15, 20 interviews, 30 even sometimes if it was a week-long event, so I'd be sitting on these archives that slowly deplete. That changed in March of 2020, and I had all these very tone-deaf episodes of us talking about what conferences we were going to go to and all that sort of stuff that I'd recorded. So I had some awkward footage early on in the pandemic. But I'm looking forward to it. And as I start to get back on the road, I'm starting to realize I need to book some more people. How do you schedule things? I'm just podcaster. Do you schedule one person a week that you connect with, or do you try to batch things, or what do you do?
Honestly, I wish I was a little bit more intentional about it right now. It's just that I have a lot of things going on in my life. I'm planning a wedding, and we're trying to buy a house in this market, and those are things that I would not normally have to plan around, or the emotional space that I wouldn't have to plan around, So right now it's just kind of wherever I have 45 minutes to an hour in my schedule that I can put people, whether that's the week of the episode, the week before the episode, or 3 weeks before the episode, it doesn't matter to me, as long as it gets done whatever's convenient for them.
That's what I did I think it's a lot harder when you're teaching, when you have like I'm fortunate in that I have more control over my schedule than I have in the past. So when possible, when I'm doing these remote interviews, I try to pick a day every couple weeks and I just go crazy. I do like 8. My wife thinks it's nuts. By the end of the day, I'm exhausted, but I just try to and it's been easier during the pandemic because so many people are home. So that day usually seems to work. But back when I was teaching, I remember interviewing people in Europe and setting my alarm for midnight. And I would wake up at midnight and talk to somebody in, somewhere in Western Europe. And I remember listening back to one of those episodes and I sounded so tired.
Oh God.
It was he was a wonderful guest, the person I'm thinking of, but it was just trying to squeeze him in whenever I could, Saturday night, Sunday morning, whatever worked for people. But it's been fun to keep it a little more schedule friendly, at least for my current schedule.
Oh yeah. For me, I would say the one thing that I do have to schedule around for sure is if I have a long teaching day, then that's all of my social energy for the day, and I could not possibly conduct a good interview after working with 13-year-olds for 5 to 7 hours. That's really the main thing.
I even did a few from my office at work. That was really awkward, but it was just, I was trying to be regular when I restarted it in 2015, but I still had the full-time job teaching it to Paul, doing all the gigs. And so I remember closing all the blinds, and locking my door and doing one with this Carlos Henriquez, this wonderful jazz bassist from New York City, and it was trying to just squeeze him in whenever I could. It was funky, but I knew that I was about to lose all that work in Chicago, so I was sort of just trying to plan and get ahead and build up the audience. And but it was a lot more pleasant opening up the schedule for this kind of stuff.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure. So while we're on this subject, you have done so many things for employment in your career, including freelancing, teaching high school orchestra, which as a performer, I'm sure that is not a thing that most performers would even consider in 100 years. And you've got your blog, you're an author, clinician, you're teaching at the university level. What advice can you give students / people who just graduated, people who are just starting out? What advice can you give them about getting started with their career nowadays, especially in a post-pandemic area?
Yeah. Well, I think this shakeup of the last year and a half has made probably just about everybody realize that it's probably good to have something on the side that you have a little more control over. And I mean, you look at the poor people in the Met that are out of work for and you think about the focus it takes to get to something like that, and to be able to have the rug pulled out under you. I have been very non-intentional about anything I do, so I'm sort of I think the one thing I did was chase what was interesting to me, and that's advice I got from the former bass professor at the University of Michigan, Diana Gannett. She said, just think about what fascinates you in the morning when you first wake up and do that. And I used to be so dark on anybody doing anything in music. Back in the mid 2000s, I was freelancing, and I felt like I was just this same bad song, same bad channel, whatever, year after year. I was just doing the same gigs. They were good gigs, but I just saw I just saw that, what am I going to be doing in 10 years? Those same gigs, if I'm lucky, and so but at the same time, I was teaching all these high school students, and it has been so interesting to follow along. Now we're 15, 18 years, whatever, from them. How many of those people that did decide to go into music, one of them is principal bass of the Lyric Opera in Chicago. Another one's principal bass of an orchestra in Germany. One has been playing in the Baltimore Symphony. So I was so dark on anybody and then we've got people that are recording engineers. We've got bassists he's been touring the world normally, as a jazz player, lives in New York City. And so I was writing all this darkness about, you have a 2% chance of making it in the music world if you're thinking classical music. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized how possible it is to do just about anything. And the podcast has opened my eyes to that too. I have a friend named Nick Villalobos. He plays in a group called Simply Three. They're based out of Phoenix. And they said, we want to be a violin, cello, bass, classical crossover group. We just want to do covers, put them out on YouTube, and tour the world. And they have done exactly that. No one was asking for this, but they have over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. They have, this year and a half excluded, they're touring the world, playing these trio shows of their own music. Another example is my friend Louis Levitt. He's in this group called Sybarite 5 in New York City. He and his friends were at Aspen summer after summer, and they were playing string quintets on the street. And he said, you know what? I want to play string quintets string quintets rather. I want to play string quintets full time, but I only want to play music written for me. Guess what? They did this year after year at Aspen. They got accepted as a group to do further studies at Aspen. They won the Young Concert Artists, and they do residencies, again, normally, not this year, all over the country, and they have actually another big YouTube following. They've done a bunch of cover tunes as well as original music. And so it's just interesting to see how possible it is. So I think that advice Diana Gannett gave is just like, what fascinates you? And just chase that.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. I love that. And that's honestly something that I've been thinking about lately, is like coming out of the pandemic and stuff. It's like, do I want to be teaching flute lessons full time 10 years from now? Is that really what I want to be doing? And the answer is no. I mean, will I want to be teaching in some capacity? Yes, for sure. But like, what else? What do I actually want to do after this pandemic and like not being barred by music school and stuff? It's like, whatever interests you. Right now I'm doing this virtual piccolo class and have had the pleasure to play for and learn from like some of the best piccolo players in the country / world. And like, wow, maybe piccolo is a thing that I should explore more. But like, I probably wouldn't have had that thought if I hadn't tried something new and done this virtual piccolo class at the end of a pandemic,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll be interested, with teaching, it's so interesting to think about like the one-on-one lesson model we've had for so long. I went through that with my training. I know you did, with schooling too. And there's a wonderful author named David Cutler. He's written a book called The Savvy Musician. He's out of the University of South Carolina, I believe. And he's done a lot of writing about just questioning that model in general. Probably a lot of people have been thinking about that during the pandemic. But just, is that one-on-one, grinding away 40 hours a week of flute lessons, is that the best way, or is having some sort of content you create that you deliver and then you have like a group class to focus on that, And so it's been interesting to watch musicians, and maybe more than would have otherwise during the pandemic, just because their income got stripped away. It's been interesting to see people designing group programs and that kind of thing. And I think that you can get trapped, really, because your one resource you can't get back is your time, right? So you teach 40 hours of flute lessons a week. You're not going to have a lot of energy to do anything else or time to do anything else. And I remember at my height, I taught 48 double bass students a week. Oh. And I used to think of it as like laundry. Like, I never actually taught them all because people were always subbing. Like, if I actually taught them all, I wouldn't have time to teach them all. But because someone was always on vacation or sick or whatever, it kind of always worked. But I had this one day, I was teaching at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater. It was every Tuesday. I had 11 hours of straight bass lessons. Ooh. With a 30-minute break that was just enough time to walk to Jimmy John's and eat my sub as I walked back to my office. And I was so bored. I would play. I know those lessons were probably terrible for those students, because I would decide, okay, today's the day where I accompany everybody on organ. Doesn't mean if they need accompany on organ, I'm playing organ today. Or today's the day where I'm going to videotape everybody, going to watch it back. And those are all good things to do, but boy, yeah, it's interesting how you can easily get trapped, doing what. And so I think it's good to stop and think. And that the same is true for folks that gig into the regional gig scene. I think musicians, and there is a season in your life when I think it's good to say yes to everything. for most people. But it's so easy for musicians to find themselves working 7 days a week, not having a day off. And I had the exact same thing. And then I started my blog and I went back to school at DePaul and I really had like no time off. It was like, and maybe 2012, I finally we moved to Hyde Park in Chicago, and all of a sudden my private teaching became inconvenient. So I decided I'm just going to take Saturdays and Sundays off, and that like changed my life. And ever since then, I guard my weekends jealously. And if it's the San Francisco calling to play, yeah, I'll play Saturday night. But I really try as much as possible, which is most of the time, to guard having a couple days off. That gives me so much more enthusiasm for whatever I'm doing, even if it's like grinding out some lessons and phases of my life or teaching high school orchestra or the creative projects I'm working on now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the lesson of like, oh, if you're a performer and, oh, yeah, you got the orchestra job, you're working the whole weekend, which is when everyone else has time off. Like, especially if your partner happens to be a non-musician. So then your time off is like the complete opposite. And like, sure, that might be a thought that students have when they're in school, but until they're actually faced with that reality, like, oh my God, I've been working 7 days a week for however long because I've been told to just grind my life away from conservatory. It's like, oh, my time is actually better spent resting and recharging and like actually being protective of that time than just keeping going.
Yeah, creating, that's why I think it's beautiful, like what you're doing with the podcast or somebody who's like starts a YouTube channel and tries to put out something once a week, or even finding something that's not the gig mill or the teaching grind, that's a little bit more of your own ownership. And not everybody's going to, if you don't have that desire, great, don't do it. I mean, there's room for all kinds of musicians and all kinds of, but if you do have some sort of spark, or idea, think about it. I think that it's the worst it's going to do is take up some of your time, but it might bring some inspiration. I mean, for me, when I quit taking professional orchestra auditions, I all of a sudden thought, do I need to practice Beethoven 5, 3 hours a day? Which I probably shouldn't have been doing anyway, lessons learned. All of a sudden I had all this open time, and that's what started me writing and doing the blogs. That, well, I don't need to polish these excerpts obsessively for hours and hours a day. Let's and that also, I intentionally decided I got to get out of this performance, gig trap that I felt I was in. And so I also thought, you know what, I'm just going to start writing about the music business. And I'm just going to say whatever I want. And because I don't think I'm ever going to play any gigs ever again. I'm not going to be mean, but I'm just going to like speak frankly. And ironically, doing that actually made me more interesting to people, which is not the intent, but I actually, a couple of years later, found myself with better gigs. And I got hired at DePaul to teach bass. And there was no way I would have gotten hired a couple of years before that. And it was really just because I'd become interesting. So it's funny, by like just deciding to not care what people think and just try to do my own thing, that actually elevated those aspects of my career I've been working so hard on before. I don't know if there's a lesson in there or not, but that's what's happened for me. Like trying to walk away from things has actually, it's almost always led to better things for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's a great lesson for people to hear, because honestly, like, I hear it a lot, it's like the people who have like let go of some things, like that's when things start to work out in ways that you never would have expected, which is super cool to see. And speaking of being interesting, because I want to be respectful of your time today, we're about out of time, but you have a lot of crazy gig stories on your blog. Do you have a crazy gig story that you can share with us today?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I have my favorite story that I have not published on the blog. I only have talked about it on a couple of podcasts, and the reason I haven't published it is because I work like the music world, and particularly like the music ed kind of world that I inhabit is so small, and I don't want to embarrass anybody with this story. But some other people involved with this have told this story on so I think we've all sort of agreed to like not be too public about it. But so what is this story? You might be wondering. So okay, I got hired in 2018 to work for this company called Musicians Toolkit. I was their orchestra content liaison. They were filming all these courses. They had filmed almost 100 courses at this point. And so I was finding string players to come in and they had a whole pop music track, and they were I was on their advisory board too. And so I was working with them, and they had me come out. They were based in Salt Lake City. They had me come out in March 2018 to film a course on bass. And this course has never seen the light of day, because if we fast forward to December 2018, we're getting ready for the Midwest Clinic, which is this big band and orchestra event in Chicago. And we're talking to the Musicians Toolkit team. And then all of a sudden I get this call from the vice president, and he says, the FBI has just raided our headquarters. We're not sure what's going on, but we just want to let the advisory board know. And this is a Friday. And I think, well, that's a weird call. And so I go out for dinner with my wife, and I say, I had a strange call, and then Monday morning comes, and we get this email saying Musicians Toolkit is dissolved, and all these very legalese looking things. So I get curious, and I start Googling. It turns out this individual who owned Musicians Toolkit owned 10 other companies in Salt Lake City, one of which was a silver rare coin trading company. They had been defrauding investors. It was a Ponzi scheme. They defrauded investors of like $250 million plus, I think was so the FBI had been on them for years. They raided all the, and so it's not clear that this guy running it, he was also, he'd for decades been really involved in supporting music education in Utah. So who knows whether it was a money laundering operation or whether it was a good-hearted event. And it was just, and they had hired, I feel terrible for these people because they'd actually hired a bunch of high school and middle school band and orchestra directors to come work for them. So they'd quit their jobs to come work for this company that then got totally dissolved. And so I have this course. So anyway, that's a weird experience. And this course never came out, but I have this one clip that was part of a children's show I filmed, and it's this zany clip of this woman saying, "What's that I hear?" And I'm playing like open strings, and she says, "It's Jason." And then I appear in a puff of flames, and I do this like really strange kind of like, sounds like we might be on tranquilizers talking about music. And but the silver lining to that is I ended up putting out a couple of bass courses I filmed them in 2020, right before the pandemic, in the UK with this wonderful company called Discover Level Bass. And it was kind of cool to go through the project of actually making an online course, because it's kind of a weird experience. And so I kind of think of that Musicians Toolkit one as my dress rehearsal. And I'm curious what happened to all that content. It's probably sitting in an FBI vault somewhere along with the other 100 courses. But, I've been wanting to make a YouTube video or something like the FBI seized my course. Here's why. But I mean, everybody, I see all the people that were on it. I think everybody's just kind of embarrassed by, it was such a cool idea and it was going such good places. The only problem was it was associated with a massive Ponzi scheme. So that's my gig story for you. It's kind of a gig story.
Wow, that is crazy. Yeah. But also, okay, I mean, getting a call that, yes, the FBI has just raided this project that you've been working on, but also like it sounds like they were kind of ahead of their time, like 2018, like filming courses like before the pandemic, like that's pretty cool. But and in hindsight it did feel like there was just a little too much money floating around this operation. And I was like, how are you paying for all these like everything just seemed to be
in retrospect, quite well funded, given that it's like a scrappy music ed startup. But yeah, they were ahead of their time. Very cool. And it's funny, that website and their social media are just sitting there like ghost ships. They still exist. And their posts, the last posts were all December 2018. But so I don't know if the FBI, I don't know what happened with that. Someday I'll share a beverage with some of the people involved once we get back to conferences and talk about it. I know some other companies were trying to buy all the content, and as far as I know, none of that happened. I fully expect that bass chorus to pop up somewhere with like foreign language subtitles, you know? And so who knows, but haven't seen it yet.
Wow, that's crazy. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. It's a good one. And I'll wrap it up here because we're already over time for today, and I know you're a busy guy, but is there anything that you would like to plug or tell the people about?
Not really. I guess I feel obligated to plug my company. If you're a flute player, Haynes flutes are our flutes and Eastman flutes. I guess I think we do good work. So I guess I'll plug Eastman. If you want to listen to a podcast that pretends to be a bass podcast but really isn't, Contrabass Conversations, and we have an app actually, which is a good way if you want to like dip your toe in and just look for a topic, because with 800 episodes, it can be a bit like, where do I even start? And the app, through my podcast hosting service, Libsyn, the app is really cool because you could type in auditions and it will just boom, 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 pull up everything we've talked about on auditions. We've had some auditions-focused episodes and where we've compiled audition advice from people. We did this series called Winning the Audition, which was advice from, I think, 30 different people back in 2016, and many other things. I put together a wonderful I think it's wonderful advice for a graduating high school senior going to music school. And we got, I believe, again, around 30 college professors to weigh in, like this I'm blanking on her name now, but she had 10 questions. She asked them, and then we had faculty from Juilliard, faculty from Rice, faculty from overseas even answer these questions. It was this super complicated project. But so maybe contrabassconversations.com/app, or just look for Contrabass Conversations in the App Store. That's a fun way to dig into the podcast. Just dip your toe in.
Cool. Is the app feature, is that part of like the premium subscription of Libsyn?
Yes. Yeah. And it's I like it because podcast adoption has increased in recent years, but it's still not everybody has listened to a podcast, but just about everybody's downloaded an app. So just being able to say, download the app is a nice thing. I don't know if I certainly wouldn't recommend it to anybody who's listening, who's thinking about starting a podcast. Just start the podcast. And at some point, maybe think about an app. It's like, takes a couple months. You got to pay some fees to get it going. And it's probably more trouble than it's worth, but it's nice. I've enjoyed, there's a simplicity to having an app that has been nice for me.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I remember when I was like trying to find a specific episode of yours, I was like, I don't know, there's so many, I don't know how to find, like just scrolling through the Apple Podcasts app like forever trying to find a particular name. So yeah, that's cool. An app would be like, I can see how that would be super helpful when you've got like a really big library to deal with. Yeah,
it's a cool way when you're dealing with something big. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It was awesome to get to talk to you and to get to see you. And I loved chatting. And I hope that everyone listening got a lot out of our conversation today.
Well, keep it up. I love the show, and I will be sure to spread the word about this episode and other episodes too. And it's bravo. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me coming from you. I really appreciate it. Also, talking to these people really inspires me to become a better podcaster. All of these guests speak so eloquently, and I'm over here with my ums and ahs and likes and editing myself way, way down, and they need no editing at all. I'm working on it. This is how we improve, right? But thank you for tagging along. Super appreciate it. Just a reminder about Heidi's course, The Podcasting Musician, coming up in July. That course meets every Saturday in July for a couple of hours. If you are if you have an idea for a podcast, have a little inkling, and are interested in trying this whole thing out, 100% definitely recommend the course for sure. And next week, we're going to be back with Karen Cubides, who is the host of the Musician's Guide podcast, which, if you haven't listened to that one yet, you should really go and check that out before her episode as well. I feel like we are similarly aligned in our purpose for podcasting, and she's so cool to get to talk to. It's such an honor to get to speak to these people. Let me know how you enjoyed this episode. Leave me a little review on Apple Podcasts. I would super appreciate it. Y'all don't understand how important those little reviews are. You feel free to join the Unclassical Musicians Facebook group. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/the Unclassical Musician. If you want to follow me on Instagram, that's where I spend most of my social media time. I'm at Tori Lupinek Flutist. If you want to follow the show, you're going to want to follow the hashtag, the Unclassical Musician, yada, yada, yada. Y'all know the drill. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate y'all choosing to spend an hour of your extremely valuable time listening to this show. Like, I don't know how I got so lucky to have such great listeners. I really appreciate you guys, and I hope y'all are enjoying your summer, and we'll be back next week. Bye, y'all.